Legal services and advice are something most of us will need at some point in our lives. Luckily, Holland Beckett lawyers have the expertise to look after you and yours. So what is a contracting out agreement?
A contracting out agreement is an agreement contracting out of the Property Relationships Act, which is the act that deals with the ownership of property between couples or spouses. It's also known as a prenuptial agreement, is a type of contracting out agreement, if you like. It's an agreement that can be entered into at any time during a relationship, right at the beginning, or before people get married, or later on in a relationship.
And who needs a contracting out agreement?
There's all sorts of different situations in which contracting out agreements can be useful. Really, it's for anyone who wants to protect a particular item or items of their property as their own, as opposed to sharing it with their partner or spouse. One of the most common situations in which people enter into contracting out agreements are when they're in perhaps a second relationship and they might have children with a previous partner. People in those circumstances sometimes like to be able to leave their assets to their children as opposed to their new partner. Often it's important that people in those circumstances have this contracting out agreement to be clear about what is theirs versus what is their new partner's, and then they're able to leave what is theirs to their children as opposed to their partner. That's just one situation in which a contracting out agreement can be used, but certainly there are other circumstances where one partner simply wants to, say, protect a higher contribution to the home that they're purchasing rather than have that divided equally between the two partners. People often have trusts and think that a trust can act in place of a contracting out agreement and will protect their assets, but that's not always the case. So sometimes even people with trusts might need an agreement.
So what happens if you don't have one of these agreements?
If people don't have an agreement, then what happens is property is divided if they separate in accordance with the Property Relationships Act. Now that Act has all sorts of rules, but one of the main rules is that relationship property is generally divided equally if people have been together in a relationship for 3 years or more. So relationship property includes things like the family home, which is the home that they lived in together before they separated, and family chattels, which can include furniture, appliances, family cars, those sorts of things. So the presumption is those will be divided equally unless there is a contracting out agreement saying something different.
And what do you need to do to enter into a contracting agreement?
There are some really formal and strict requirements to make a contracting out agreement binding. The first thing that people need to do is go and see a lawyer. They must each receive independent legal advice. So one partner or spouse needs to go and see one lawyer and the other partner or spouse needs to see a lawyer from a different firm. Once they've received that advice, then they can have an agreement drawn up and ensure that they're happy with it. They can then sign that agreement and their lawyer must also sign. So the agreement must be in writing, signed by the parties and their lawyers for it to be binding, otherwise it's not.
And what about de facto relationships?
Yes, so contracting out agreements can cover people in both de facto relationships and people who are married or in a civil union. A de facto relationship, people don't, strictly speaking, necessarily have to be living together to fall within that definition. It's quite a potentially broad definition, so if people think there's even a possibility that they may be in a de facto relationship, they should definitely talk to a lawyer about that.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Claire.
Not a problem, thank you.
So if you need help on contracting agreements or general legal advice, be sure to contact Holland Beckett Lawyers.